Chapter 7. Someone New. Margaret watched Arthur eat. In one hand, she held the packets in which the food had been wrapped. They were paper, cut into rectangles about the size of candy bar wrappers. The paper had an odd consistency, was slightly brittle, and was colored light brown. She examined each piece, front and back, thinking there might be writing on it, but there wasn't. Someone knew. Part of her felt like shouting for joy, but it was so confusing. Had the person seen her signs and brought the food to the cave? If so, why hadn't he come forward and introduced himself? Where was he now? Had he called the police or her parents? Her head whirled. She ate half of one of the little pieces of bread. The flavor was nutty, odd, but good. But she wanted more. It was such a little piece. I could easily eat the whole loaf, she thought. Perhaps the person was still close by. She began to shout, "Hello! Where are you? Please come back!" There was no reply. She looked for footprints, but the ground outside was rocky, and inside the dusky cave, she couldn't find any distinct print. Arthur had finished his meal and was watching her. She had a funny feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. He had been in the cave when the food was left, though he might have been sleeping. But he seemed calm, as if he expected that someone would look after them. He had gone without his medicine for 2 days, yet his breathing seemed almost normal. She mustn't upset him, but she was determined to find out what he knew. She remembered a game her parents played with Arthur when they were trying to help him communicate. They would hold up little cards, one at a time, and ask him to clap when he saw whatever they wanted him to identify: a triangle, or the color blue, or picture of a girl. If Arthur was in a good mood, he liked the game and played it pretty well. But if he was in a bad mood, he wouldn't clap at all, not even to get a piece of candy. It was worth a try. She sat down opposite him. "We're going to try to figure out who brought the food," she said, trying to make her voice light-hearted. "I'll say something, and if you know it's true, clap your hands. If you don't know, don't clap. Understand?" Arthur nodded. "The person who brought the food is a man," said Margaret. Arthur waited. "The person who brought the food is a woman." Nothing. Still. Arthur's eyes were bright, as if he were waiting for the right clue. "The person is a child." Nothing. Margaret was starting to feel discouraged. "The person was wearing blue jeans." Nothing. "The person was wearing a knapsack." Arthur stared. There had been a knapsack each time. He was certain of it. He wasn't sure whether to clap or not, so he brought his hands together softly, just once. "He was wearing a knapsack." Margaret tried to keep the urgency out of her voice. Arthur did know something. "He was wearing a knapsack, right, Artie?" Again, Arthur paused, but brought his hands together softly. She hadn't asked about the animal, and the animal was important. If she asked about that, he would clap loud. "Was it a woman? Clap if it was a woman." Arthur waited. "A man? A kid, like us?" Arthur looked confused. She wasn't asking the right questions. "It's got to be one of them." Margaret's mind raced. Maybe for some reason Arthur didn't know the sex of the person, but he might know something else. "Which way did he go, Arthur? Did he go that way?" She pointed down the slope toward the blackberry thicket. "Clap if he went that way." Nothing. Arthur couldn't remember which way it had gone. He wasn't sure he'd even noticed. "Did he go that way?" She pointed up beyond the rocky ledge, but again Arthur did nothing, just sat there. Margaret felt anger rising in her throat. Surely he knew. He knew, but he was being stubborn, just the way he was at home. He knew, but he wouldn't say. "Arthur," she made her voice strong, "you have to tell me. It's very important." Arthur put his hands behind his back. You have to tell me. I need to know. He just sat. If you don't tell me, I'll go away. I'll leave you here by yourself. Arthur stared. Behind his back, his fingers curled around and touched each other. She had wanted to play the game, but she hadn't asked the right questions. And now she was angry at him. He felt as if he'd swallowed something too big for his throat. He watched as she got up and walked deliberately away. A tear rolled down his cheek into his mouth. Then he realized he was going to have the problem. He felt like all the breath was being squashed out of him. He imagined his mother coming with the tube, but she didn't come. He lay down on the rock, gasping, nothing else in his mind. Christopher watched from the thicket. He had seen rats suffer attacks like this, where they panted and gasped for breath. Sometimes they came out of it on their own. Other times they swallowed a green potion that Elvira or Raxo prepared for them. The potion slowed their breathing and their reactions too. They must lie still for a full hour after drinking it. Christopher wasn't sure whether the potion would help RT. The boy was stretched flat, head to one side. He had stopped gasping, but his breathing was fast and light. He could die, Christopher thought. I'm the only one who knows he needs help. Without me, he could die. He went over and stood beside Arthur. This time, Christopher didn't think about what he should do or what would be best for the rest of the rats. He spoke. Don't be scared. You're going to be okay. Arthur's eyes flicked open. Down at the nest, we have medicine that could help you, Christopher continued. I'm going to go get some for you, and more food, too. Is there anything else you need? Arthur just stared. I already know you're called RT. I heard the other one call you that. Christopher paused and looked around. She really shouldn't have left you here the way she did, but I'll take care of you. And I suppose she'll come back anyway. A part of him wished she wouldn't come back, but he didn't say that. Arthur groaned. He wanted Margaret. Do you want to come with me? Is that what's wrong? Arthur shook his head no. He didn't want to go without Margaret. Believe me, I'll come back, Christopher said. He slipped on his knapsack and nodded goodbye. My name is Christopher, he said. He set off down the trail at a fast clip. Margaret came back as soon as the animal had gone. She had been hiding. She didn't look angry anymore, but she stared at Arthur as if he looked different. For a minute, she didn't say anything. Then she said, I saw it, Artie. He looked at her. The thing with the knapsack, she said. It looked like a rat, and it was talking to you. She sat down heavily. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. Chapter 8. Food and Medicine. The words beat a rhythm in Christopher's brain as he raced down the trail. He was worried about Artie, very worried, and he had to get the medicine right away. So he was almost all the way to the nest before the thought struck him. I talked to him. I talked to Artie. There were going to be problems. He could see that already. Whatever food he brought for the boy would have to be shared with the female. That meant he would need a lot of food. And sneaking the medicine wasn't going to be that easy. For one thing, he wasn't sure which of the potions was which, and he didn't want to give Artie the wrong thing. For another, there was almost always somebody in the lab, either Elvira or Raxo. Raxo. Christopher's legs kept racing, but his mind slowed, considering. Raxo would keep the secret, and Raxo had lived in the city most of his life, so he knew a lot about humans. If anyone at Thorn Valley could give him good advice about Artie, it would be Raxo. Christopher found Raxo in the laboratory. He made sure they were alone. He closed the door to the corridor and pulled him into a corner. Listen, he whispered. I have to tell you something, and you have to keep it a secret.
I've been wondering where in the world you were. Everybody's been working to camouflage the gardens because of the missing children, and you haven't been around.
Christopher had been trying to frame the words he would say next, but he wasn't really listening to Raxo. But he couldn't help hearing the words missing children. He scowled impatiently.
What are you talking about? Did some of the little rats wander away? Not little rats.
Raxo was pleased to be the one to break the news.
Human beings.
Christopher's jaw dropped.
They got lost on the other side of the mountain, and people are looking for them with helicopters. Nicodemus and Justin said they might fly over the valley, so we had to cover up the gardens and take down all the play equipment until the search is over. I found out about it when I got back from our hike. We worked until past midnight. Where were you?
Raxo asked. Christopher took a deep breath. I found them, he said. They would have kept it a secret between themselves, except Raxo argued that they would never be able to sneak enough food on their own or carry it up the mountain to feed the humans. Think as they might, there didn't seem to be any way around that. Raxo maintained that the larger child would eat 3 pounds of food a day, and the small one probably 1 pound. Between himself and Christopher, they might carry close to 2.5 pounds, but that would be a heavy load, and it wouldn't even be enough for a whole day. But if they had one more rat to help them, they could carry 3.75 pounds. The most logical choice would be someone who worked with food, who would be able to sneak it from the storeroom or the kitchen without arousing suspicion. But when Raxo said her name out loud, Christopher recoiled.
Isabella? I don't think she can keep a secret.
Raxo shrugged.
What other choice do we have? That's true. If we could only make her feel she's a vital part of an important maneuver. I've got it.
Raxo's eyes lit up.
We'll convince her to help us carry the food up there, and then we'll show her who it's for. We'll have to show her from a distance, Christopher said nervously. The big one doesn't know anything about us, and Artie has only met me. I don't want to upset him. He's been sick. Right. They said that on the radio. Nicodemus told us. He takes medicine every day for asthma. How much do you think he weighs?
Raxo had taken a beaker of fluid down from the shelf.
Gee, I don't know. We give this by weight.
Raxo measured out a large dose.
It's for rats with respiratory problems. In fact, you probably had it yourself when you fell out of the tree and punctured your lung. But we made it better since then.
He put the beaker, almost empty, back on the shelf.
The effects should last for a couple of hours.
As he said these words, Raxo got a funny feeling, as if perhaps they had not thought clearly about exactly what they were doing.
Christopher?
Yeah?
How long are we going to keep this a secret? I mean, do you think they'll be around for more than a few days? I was just wondering because of the medicine.
I don't know, Christopher said. He didn't really want to think about that.
You leave that kind of stuff to me,
he added. Raxo nodded. He was very excited to be in on the secret. He tried not to think about anything else. There were problems with Isabella right from the start. For one thing, she couldn't get past the rule, which Nicodemus had told everyone the night before, that all the rats were supposed to stay inside for the next 2 days in case a helicopter flew over.
You tell me what it's about, she said. Then I'll know whether it's worth breaking the rules for.
Christopher was all for dropping her right then, but Raxo was patient.
Isabella, you know we wouldn't ask you to help if there were anyone else who could do this, but there isn't.
Well, Isabella looked smug.
You're sure this isn't going to get me into trouble? Of course not. Well, okay. What we have to do now,
Raxo signaled for Christopher to stay quiet, to let him handle it,
is to get about 4 pounds of food.
Food?
What kind of food? A mixture. Bread, nuts, carrots, stuff like that. I could get it from the kitchen, I guess.
Isabella still looked doubtful.
We had acorns left over from supper last night.
Acorns won't do, Christopher said quickly, but walnuts would be fine, and peanut butter, maybe some raisins.
We're not stealing this stuff, are we? Of course not.
Raxo sounded more certain than he felt. Isabella just seemed to have trouble getting into the spirit of the adventure. She complained that her pack was killing her. Why had she let them persuade her to do this? She was sure she would get in trouble for it, just at the time she was trying to present a better image. Christopher was so disgusted with her that he couldn't even enjoy the thought of seeing RT again. But there was no way out of it. They were almost to the cave. He ran ahead and scouted. There was no sign of the children.
And how can you say it isn't stealing?
Isabella went on.
You know the food belongs to the whole community, not just us. Be quiet.
Christopher ushered Raxo and Isabella into the thicket.
You wait here. I'm going into the cave to see if he's there.
Who? Isabella demanded. Raxo signaled for her to hush. His eyes were bright with excitement. Later, Christopher wasn't sure why he hadn't thought about the other one being there. Maybe it was because Artie had been alone when he'd gone into the cave before. And when he first went in, he didn't see her, only Artie, sitting cross-legged on the heap of pine needles he used for a bed. Christopher felt so happy to see him that he waved one paw and said cheerfully,
I told you I'd come back.
The little boy didn't smile. He looked scared.
I brought the food and medicine just like I promised. How are you feeling? My friend measured out a dose that should be perfect.
That was when the stick came down. It hurt a lot, and it was so thick and thorny that it was just like being caught in a trap. Christopher yelped. He struggled to free himself, but the more he struggled, the more tangled up he got. His knapsack straps were stuck in some of the branches, and a thorn was piercing the tender flesh of his nose. Artie was just sitting there, not moving at all. But then she loomed over both of them, the end of the trap held firmly in both her hands.
Let me go,
Christopher shrieked. But she shook her head. Somehow she had managed to slip a string around his neck, and she was pulling on that so that he was choking. She jerked the string with one hand and rammed him up against the wall of the cave with the branch, pushing the thick part hard against his chest.
Give up,
she shouted. Christopher struggled. He was aware of Raxo and Isabella hiding outside, but he had no way to let them know he was in trouble.
Give up,
she repeated. She rammed him harder with the stick. It hurt horribly. Christopher could hardly catch his breath to speak.
Okay,
he said.
I give up.
He was furious at her. The first thing she did was take another string. He noticed later that the laces were gone from her shoes, and tie it around all 4 of his paws. She drew the knot so tight that he couldn't move. Then she flipped him on his side and put the stick against his neck. She yanked the knapsack off his back. He could hear her rifling through the contents, pulling out the parcels, opening each one. After that, she seemed to calm down a little. He could hear Artie in the background, crying softly. Once there was a sound of a struggle and a thump and louder crying. Eventually, the girl picked up the string that bound him and carried him head down over to the door of the cave. She stared down at him with round, frightened eyes, the stick still in one hand. After the darkness, the bright sunlight made him blink. She continued to examine him as if she couldn't believe her eyes.
Who are you?
She said. He spit some of the pine needles out of his mouth, trying to figure out what to do. She had already heard him speak, so there was no use pretending that he couldn't. He took a deep breath.
I'm Christopher.
Christopher who?
Just Christopher. That's my only name.
He was afraid she would hit him again, but she didn't.
Why can you talk?
He tried to be careful.
My parents taught me.
Animals don't talk. She sounded so angry and upset that Christopher knew answering would be pointless. She continued to stare at him miserably. If she hadn't hurt him so badly with the stick, Christopher could have felt sorry for her. He thought about RT and the medicine and decided to try to reason with her.
I'm a friend,
he said quietly.
I brought food for you this morning and more when I came this afternoon. And I brought medicine for RT. Why did you do everything in secret? I was afraid of you.
She was quiet for a moment, realizing the truth of what he'd said.
But you talked to Arthur when he was sick. Somebody had to help him. I don't think it was very nice of you, leaving him alone the way you did.
Her eyes snapped.
I didn't really leave him. I was up on the ledge, watching him the whole time. I just pretended to leave to try to get him to tell me what he knew.
Suddenly, the anger left her, and her voice quavered.
I have to find a way to call my parents. We've been lost for 3 days. We've hardly even had anything to eat.
The girl sat down and stared at him dolefully. She was still holding the string in one hand, but she had dropped the stick. Arthur came out and stood behind her. His lower lip stuck out. Christopher could tell he was unhappy.
You should give him the medicine.
Medicine? The girl snorted.
You think I'm going to feed my brother rat medicine? It will help him.
Christopher tried to keep his voice level.
Our health practitioners made the potions from plants and minerals here in the valley. What do you mean, your health practitioners? You mean there's more than just you?
Christopher could see now that he'd made a mistake.
A few more? Where are they?
Two of them are in the thicket, about 20 feet away from us, Christopher said to himself. But aloud, knowing that he was again being less than completely honest, he said,
They live in the valley.
Down there? She gestured down the slope. He nodded.
Are they all like you? What do you mean?
It was her turn to hesitate.
Animals? Rats?
He nodded again.
Do they have telephones? No telephones, but they have food and maps. A map wouldn't do us much good, not when there aren't any roads or towns or anything.
Christopher didn't say anything.
Humph.
She strode away, her hands deep in her blue jeans pockets. She appeared to be considering. After a while, she came back. She picked up Christopher by the string, not nastily, but as if she had decided something.
I want to get a message to your friends in the valley, she said. I want them to lead me and Arthur out of here, back to where we came from. And I'm going to hold you hostage until they do that. Hostage? Christopher frowned. What's that? Prisoner, said the girl. And if they refuse to cooperate, I'll kill you.
Christopher thought he was going to faint. He held his breath, then breathed deeply 3 times, fighting off dizziness. In the background, somewhere beyond the pounding of his own heart, he heard Arthur saying,
No, no, no.
Chapter 9.
Just like Arthur, she thought, to say his first word in 2 years in defense of a talking rat.
She shoved more walnuts and a couple of raisins into her mouth, followed by a half slice of the bread. It tasted pretty good, she had to admit. But when she thought of who had made it, she shuddered. She was eating food that had been touched by rats. Yuck! She had to force the idea out of her mind. She thought again about Arthur. She had always known he could talk if he really wanted to. Wait until Leon heard about this. She was weak. Ironically, the food seemed to make her feel even weaker, but she knew it must be helping her. She had given half of it to Arthur. He gobbled it, even though she told him to slow down. He wasn't as half-starved as she was, though. He'd had most of the food from this morning, as well as the berries, and apparently the rat had left him some stuff the afternoon before. The rat! It was lying on the floor of the cave, tied to a large rock. There could be no question about its talking. She had wondered at first whether it was stuffed and operated by remote control with a tape inside it, but a tape couldn't answer questions the way it had, and it had bled when she tied it up, so it was alive. It reminded her of reruns of The Twilight Zone she'd watched on TV. I'm in the Twilight Zone, she thought, but it didn't seem funny. She had given the medicine to Arthur. She'd found it in a small leather pouch in the knapsack and had tasted it first herself. It was minty and slightly sweet, like honeysuckle. For some reason, she trusted what the rat had said about it, and that it wouldn't hurt Arthur. The rat seemed really concerned about Arthur, and Arthur liked it too. But what to do next? She had to get in touch with the rest of them, the ones that lived in the valley. If they could talk, could they also read? Hey, rat! Christopher didn't move. Hey, rat! You! Christopher! What? Can you read and write? Of course I can. Well, pardon me. You're probably a Harvard graduate. Margaret laughed uneasily. What do you write on? Oh, I know, that paper you had the food wrapped up in. She retrieved it from a corner of the cave. And to write with, she thought out loud. How about some blackberry ink? And I'd better take Artie while I go get it, since I can't trust him not to untie you while I'm gone. She took the boy by the hand and went out. She was back in minutes, some mashed up berries in one hand, a broken twig in the other. She untied Christopher from the rock, leaving his paws bound, and lifted him unceremoniously by the shoestring. She took him to the doorway, where there was more light. Her voice was brisk, businesslike. I want you to write a letter. The strength of Christopher's own voice surprised him. I won't. What do you mean? I mean, I won't. Margaret was surprised and puzzled. She hadn't expected the rat to resist, and she wasn't sure what to do. She decided to try another tack. Look, she said. Her voice was gentle, persuasive. This is the best thing for you. The sooner you write the letter, the sooner your friends can help me, and the sooner you'll be free. I don't care. Why not? Because you're mean. You were mean to Artie, and you were mean to me. Margaret was exasperated. Of course, it seems like I'm mean. You're my hostage. I can't kidnap someone and then act like a cream puff, can I? Christopher didn't say anything. His jaw was set in a way that looked permanent. Look, you're not being realistic. Margaret took a deep breath. She couldn't believe she was defending herself to a rat. I am not mean, really. Silence. Look, it's survival. I mean, how long do you think we could survive? We're humans, and we're not meant to live out here in the wilderness like you are. Don't you see? She looked for some sign of understanding on the rat's face, but his eyes were closed tight and he was completely still. It wasn't as if she could have a staring contest with him. If she'd been able to do that, she'd be pretty sure she could win. The way she usually did in the school cafeteria. The way he was acting made her nervous. All right, she said loudly. I'm sorry. The rat moved slightly and opened one eye. I'm sorry, she repeated. I guess I hurt your feelings. You certainly did hurt my feelings, Christopher swallowed. It hasn't been any field trip for me trying to help you two. You were really trying to help Artie, not me.
Well,
She saw the opening and took it.
well, now you can really help him. You can write this letter to your friends. If I do, will you let me go?
Not immediately. She could see that the rat didn't completely understand this hostage idea.
See, I have to use you to get the others to cooperate, but I will free you eventually.
She put the paper, berries, and twig down beside Christopher.
I'll tell you what to say. You'll have to untie my paw. I'll just loosen the string.
Christopher dipped the pen into the middle of a ripe berry.
Go ahead. Dear friends,
Margaret watched with amazement as the rat produced a tiny, neat script.
I have been taken hostage. That's HOSTAGE by two children.
She waited for Christopher to catch up.
They are treating me well, but they will not let me go until someone helps them get home. Now sign your name. You're not treating me well. Look, just sign your name, okay?
Christopher's ears flattened in irritation, but he did sign his name. Margaret took the letter and inspected it. The rat had great penmanship. Her own handwriting was sprawling and large, so she printed in block letters below Christopher's message. Notify me of your intentions with regard to the hostage within 24 hours. Signed, Margaret.
Where should I put it so that the others will find it?
Christopher pretended to think hard about this.
Try putting it over by the stone, a little to the left of the thicket there. You think they'll come so close? I thought you said they live in the valley. I think someone will find it, Christopher said. If not, we can try another place tomorrow.
He slept badly. He was still tied up, and when he woke at dawn, he was stiff and sore. He'd had bad dreams about the girl, who he now knew was called Margaret, dreams that he was being hurt trying to protect RT. His real name, the girl had explained, was Arthur, but the family called him RT, which she spelled ARTIE. She told him, whispering, that RT was a mental case because he wouldn't talk or act his age. She knew that he could do better, but her parents ignored her opinion and let him get away with murder. Christopher was startled at that. He couldn't imagine the mild-mannered, gentle RT hurting anyone.
Oh, oh no, she had laughed. That was only an expression, to get away with murder. It meant that the boy simply did whatever he wanted to, no matter what others expected of him.
Christopher felt like saying, "That sounds like you, not Artie," but he held his tongue. Now he could hear the boy's quick, light breathing behind him, as mild in sleep as he was awake. In contrast, Margaret's snoring was like the opening and closing of a creaky door. Then the boy stirred and sat up. Christopher felt a hand stroke his back. Margaret woke up groaning. She turned over, trying to go back to sleep, but eventually she gave up. She took Arthur by the hand and went outside. When they came back, there were blackberries for everyone, including Christopher, and there was something else too, a letter. Her hands shook as she opened it. The piece of paper was larger, with the same slightly rough feel to it. The text was written in lavender ink in a beautiful flowing script. She read it out loud.
My dear Margaret, the aforementioned rat, Christopher, has been placed in exile, and we do not wish that he be returned to us. Thank you for providing a home for him, and best wishes for your continued stay at Thorn Valley. Warmly, Nicodemus.
What?
Margaret shrieked. She couldn't believe it. She stamped one foot, crumpled up the letter, screamed again, uncrumpled it, and looked at it to make sure she'd read it right. Arthur was so alarmed by her behavior that he jumped to his feet and stared. Then Arthur's attention shifted. He had caught sight of Christopher. The little rat was lying curled up against the wall of the cave, sobbing his heart out. "Try and pull yourself together," Margaret said. "Crying doesn't help." There was no indication that her words were heard. She had been standing near the door of the cave for what seemed like hours, listening to the rat sob. For a while, she thought he might be faking, that the whole thing had been some kind of setup that he was in on all along. But as time passed and the crying continued, she came to doubt that. Not even she could have faked it for that long, and she'd done her fair share of faking. No, the rat was genuinely shook up. And so, of course, was Arthur. Margaret watched as he tried to comfort the weeping animal. Then he sat down beside Christopher and began to cry himself. The tears rolled down his cheeks silently, and he sat with his arms dangling between his knees as if he were exhausted. She read the letter again. "The rat has been placed in exile." That meant they'd kicked him out, told him to get lost, which was more than likely what he was crying about. She wondered why they'd done it. Then the funny part. "Thank you for providing a good home." She scowled. To foist him off on her, in her situation, when they decided they didn't want him anymore, as if she could take care of someone else besides Arthur. Well, she wasn't going to put up with that. No way. But the problem was she couldn't just dump him now, because Arthur had gotten attached to him. The whole thing was just infuriating. She jammed her fists into the pockets of her jeans and stepped out into the open, leaving the other two to cry. She fetched more berries and another twig and sat down on the ground, turning the letter over so that a blank surface was facing her. She didn't bother to address the rat who had signed the message. She couldn't figure out his name anyway. Instead, she just wrote in large letters, "You must take rat back. Signed, Margaret." She folded the paper, stuck it back over by the thicket, and set a rock on top of it so that it wouldn't blow away. Take rat